Well, gentlemen and ladies, I was supposed to talk about how the Pheasant Club started. But to do that, I've got to go back to 1916 when my father came to this country. He came from Italy, came across the United States in the train, landed in Sacramento, got off the train. He's 17 years old, not knowing a soul, and spoke no English. He got off the train with his little suitcase, walked over down the street, and he seen the Commercial Hotel on 3rd and I. So he walked in, and the bartender was talking to somebody in Italian, and so he went up to him and asked him if there was anything that he could do to get a job, because he just got into Sacramento. And the owner says, "Oh, the fellow that cleans up just quit, so you have a job." So he mopped floors, cleaned bathrooms, whatever it was, he did. So he was there for about 6 months. And one morning, two fellows came in from Ryer Island. I don't know if any of you know. Steve knows where Ryer Island is. And they were farmers down there, and they were talking to the owner in Italian. And he says, "Do you know if there's a cook around? Our cook just quit us, and we need a cook to cook for about 20 men. And my father thought, "Bango. I was a cook in Italy." He said, "Would I be able to help you?" And he says, "Sure, if you can cook." He says, "This is December 1st. March 1st, we'll come and pick you up and take you down to Ryer Island." So as soon as the man left, he went to the owner and said, "Look, I'll get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll do all my work so I can go in the kitchen and help the chef." And the owner says, "You're in luck." He says, "The sous chef that was working quit, so you got the job." So for 3 months, he worked at the help of the chef. So March 1st, they come and they pick him up and they take him to Ryer Island. And in those days, there was no roads. They came up on the steamship from Rio Vista. They put him back on the ship and took him to Rio Vista. Well, he stayed there for about 2 years. In the meantime, he meets my mother and they get married. And so after they got married, there was another job at the end of Jefferson Boulevard with another big farmer. And so him and my mother went in and they both cooked and took care of all the crew. So the owner one day bought 200 acres right across the street from the farm. But it was full of tulies and trees and stuff. So he told the owner one day, he said, "If I go in and clean all this up, will you give me 1 year free rent?" And he said, "Sure." So every free moment that he had, he went out and he burned tulies, he burned brush, cleaned it all up. The next year, he planted beans, 200 acres of beans. The beans grew big, the price grew bigger, and when he was all through, paid all his expenses, he deposited $72,000 in the Bank of America. This is 1921. So he quit the job, and him and my mother and my two sisters were born then. They went back to Italy to visit my mother's family and his family. So they visited my mother's family for about a week or so, and then they went to where my dad was from, a little town called Lucca. And they were there 3 or 4 days, and one day the mail comes from my father. He said, "What the hell am I getting mail here in Italy? I haven't been here for 5 years." It was a draft notice from Mussolini. So he told my mother, no, this isn't going to work. He says, "If I'm going to go in the army, I'm going to go back to the United States." So he told my mother, "You just wait right here." So he takes off and he goes about 20 miles away. There was a port called Civitavecchia. He went in there and he walked along the gangplank and he's looking for a ship that has the American flag. He finds a ship with the American flag and he goes over to the fella at the gangplank and said, I want to see the captain. He says, nobody sees the captain. He says, no way you can get up there. So a little conversation and a few bills handed back and forth, and up the gangplank he went, and he talked to the captain for a while, and the captain says, no, we don't have any facilities for passengers. So a little more conversation and a few bills passed, and so the captain says, 10 o'clock tonight, you be on board because we're going out tonight. This is the cargo ship, so be prepared. So he went home, got my mother and my two sisters, and they got on the ship, and they came back to the United States. So he's here about a month, and he's looking for some more property because he left the farm. So up in Verona, a little town up here by the Feather River, he finds 500 acres of beans, of ground. So he goes in there and he plants 500 acres of beans. 1st of December, they come in and they harvested them. Beautiful, good crop. That next morning, it started to sprinkle, started to rain. 5 days later, the beans floated down the bypass. So he loses everything. So they come back to town, and he has a few bucks, so he rents a house for my mother and the family. I wasn't born yet. And he got to find something to do. So one day he was visiting a friend of his that has a bar on 3rd Street, and they were talking, and this fella comes in and he says, tells the owner, he says, I'm a bootlegger, and I want to sell you some bootleg whiskey. And the guy says, I already buying from somebody, I can't change. So my dad followed him out, and he says, hey, you making bootleg whiskey? And he says, yeah. He says, how about you and I go to partners? You make it and I'll sell it. So my dad knew a lot of guys around town, so he cut the price down to basically barely making a profit. But little by little he raised the price, and pretty soon he was making money and the guy was making money. So in 1931 he bought a home on 17th and V, and I was born in 32. So we stayed there, and my dad was still making a few bucks, bootlegging. So one day he found out that there was a place in West Sacramento for sale, a building in 10 acres. So he came over, there it was. The building here with 7,000 square feet, 10 acres. And he looked at it and he thought about it, and he said, no, I'm gonna buy it. So he bought it for $5,000. So he was here, we moved in, and we were here for a month, maybe. And one day, we had a row of barns back there, and he was in the back there. And this great big Cadillac drives in. And the fella gets out, and he's a man of color, all dressed up to a T, shiny shoes and all. And he says, tells my dad, I'm looking for George. And my dad says, my name is George. He said, my name is Bill Densby. He says, I'm the fella that used to run this, I used to own this place. So he says, I can't get over how this place is made. He says, let me tell you my story. He says, out behind these barns, there was a grove of bamboo, about 1/4 acre or over. He says, I went in there and I made a path of 3 feet. I made a square of 10 by 10. I built a shack in there, and I put a still in there. And I started making bootleg whiskey. He says, I came to the back dining room. I put a bar back there. And up in front where the bar is now, he says, between the 2 pillars, I built a bandstand. Then I had a guy take red burlap, dyed it red, and coated it from the top of the ceiling down. And I had booths all along the side, fireplace on the end, and people would come in and drink and sit by the fireplace in winter time, and we had gals out there servicing them. Up in front, we had, that comes next, Kent, that comes next. Up in front, we had 4 tables. and that was for the gambling. And under each table there was a buzzer. And he said, when somebody got out of hand, he flipped the buzzer, and here comes the bouncer, and he took care of everything. He said, then upstairs we had 3 bedrooms. One on the west side that my wife and I stayed, he said. On this end, there was 2 bedrooms, and then a living room in the middle. He says, in the living room in the middle, he said, I had big leather chairs for the girls to give them drinks and take care of them. And on 2 bedrooms, he says, there's where the lady of the evenings were. And he said, the men would go upstairs, have a few drinks, and then do their thing and come down. And my dad said, boy, you really had something going here. He said, did you ever find the secret room? And my dad said, what secret room? He says, come with me. Then they go up the stairs, and they go in Patty's office. And when they built this building, the roof came down, and then the walls came up 4 feet. So there wasn't much of an area there, so they went in and they built another wall, 8 feet high. So now they had like a subway in there. So he goes in where Patty's office was, he opens the door, and there's a wall, identical to the walls that they had built, that he built himself. He says, tell my dad, give me a clothes hanger. So my dad gets a clothes hanger and he straightens it out. He goes down, he puts it in a little hole, and this door opens up. 42 inches high and 20 inches wide. And he goes inside there, him and my dad goes inside, and there's shelves all the way around. He told my dad, this is where I kept all my bootleg whiskey. He said, they'd make it out in the back, and he said, as soon as made, he came up here, and I put it in here. And he had it in gallons and fifths and pints, and nobody ever found it. He said, if the feds came in and found my still, that's all right, I can build another still, but I still got all the booze in here. So every once in a while, he would come back out and visit and talk to my dad, bring guests, show him all around. I mean, he was a very, very nice man. So then we were here for, 4 or 5 years. And when we moved here, my mother took care of the bar, and my dad farmed. And then in 37, my dad decided to tear all that out. So he went in and he tore everything out, all the burlap and everything, and he moved the bar from the back to the front. And he opened up the Hideaway Inn. When it was a speakeasy, it was called the Tiger Inn. And it was Tiger Inn for 4 or 5 years during the Prohibition. So then my dad had the bar, and my mother and him ran the bar and raised a family. And then in 1945, my mother and dad and my oldest sister and her husband, John Rivera, went to San Francisco. And they went to visit a relative. And afterwards they went to the North Beach Cafe, and they had dinner. So everybody had something different. So my mother asked my father, how's your cachatura? And my father said, well, it's not bad, but not as good as you. So he asked my sister, how's your veal? Well, it's all right, but not as good as you, Mom. So everybody agreed that the dinner was fine, but not as good as Mama cooked. So my brother-in-law says, maybe we should open up a restaurant. So they all kind of thought about it. So they came back to Sacramento, and 2 or 3 months, they decided, by golly, that's what we're going to do. So my dad, the bar was already in front, the front dining room and the cove. So they did open up in 1946, and they called it the Golden Pheasant. And they had a sign, Golden Pheasant. Well, about 4 months later, we get a letter from San Francisco from an attorney that said that there was already a Golden Pheasant in San Francisco, and it was copyrighted, so they had to change the name. So my father wasn't about to throw the sign away, so he took Golden out and put Club, and that's where Club Pheasant ever came from. So it started going pretty good, and my mother cooked, My brother-in-law tended bar, and my three sisters worked washing dishes, doing everything, making salad, doing everything. So they started going pretty good. So then my other sister and her husband, Fred Andriotti, who was a detective in the city police force, they moved in. So my dad built a house next door, and two families lived upstairs. And then from there it kept going bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then in 1964, I always farmed with my dad. I was a farmer, but I lost quite a bit of my ground. So I came to work here at the Pheasant Club. Well, the year before, this was in 64, in year 63, my nephew, Ron Rivera, came to work here. He was working for Willie DePrado at Willie's Market. And he had been working there for quite a while. And his dad needed a bartender, so he came in. So in 64, then I came in. And then we worked here for quite a few years. And as our brother-in-laws retired, we bought them out. And then in 74, we built this banquet room and made the kitchen bigger and did a lot of remodeling. And then in, about 74, Patty came to work. She graduated out of college, out of junior college, and she came and she started making salads in the kitchen. And then my two sisters said, no, we're gonna put you out in the dining room as a hostess, because Patty has the personality like my two sisters did. You know, she knows everybody and does everything with them. So then Patty worked here started working here, and then Paul came in. Paul was working for Ram Auto Parts for Rames's, and then he came in, and then Pete came in. He had a milk route, Newton milk route, and he sold that and came in working here. And then Perry got out of junior college, and he worked. He came in. So the three kids, the three boys and Patty all came in, but they all worked at it as a love in a business. You cannot have a business if you don't love it. And that's what they did. They just grabbed this thing and just started going with it. And they just built it to where it is today. It's hard to explain what a business does to a person, but it becomes part of you. You learn, Tom, you know what that is.
Yes, sir.
You know, and the kids just grabbed it. Patty had this business. She had 25 waitresses that she hired and fired. She took care of all the incidentals that they had. In the morning, Susie would call and say, my little boy is not feeling good today. So she'd have a couple of extras. She'd call them in, and she worked with them, and everybody was happy. It was a happy family. It was like Cheers. Everybody knew everybody, you know. And it made it an enjoyable place to come to. And then the boys, they took over the back part. They fired all the kitchen help, the kids in the kitchen that made salads and washed dishes and all of that. But they never squabbled about what they had to do. If you were on duty and the toilet plugged up, that was your job to go take care of it. If somebody made a mess, you cleaned it up. On Mondays, since the day we opened up in 46, we closed on Mondays. But every Monday we closed, we cleaned the kitchen. We got the kitchen. Take everything off of the stove, bring it out into a burning barrel, boil it in caustic soda, steam clean everything, go it through all the hoods. But that's the what keeps the place like this going. You got to keep it clean. And these boys never questioned. They'd say, Dad, what do we do now? And we just, they never questioned anything. They just did it. And that's how we become what we are today, is almost like an institution. We're one of the oldest restaurants in the area. Frank Fats, the Espanol, there's 3 or 4 that have been there as long as we have. But it's something that we enjoy doing. And after we had our 5 children, my wife came in and she helped us. We started making raviolis for Rayleigh's. And we were making 60,000 raviolis a week, plus the sauce. So my wife came in and she worked here, and she has a sense of food, the sense of the seasoning. Like Wednesday, we made chili beans for 300 people. She came down with me and we made 300 beans for 300 people. And it was, for her, it was nothing. I mean, because she knows the seasoning, you know. So everything goes along, and everybody worked to be happy. And I think that brings me up to the end of the Pheasant Club era. Is there any questions?
What about this place being haunted?
There is some things to that, Tom.
Yeah.
When my mother and father died, we rented the house to a waitress here. And one day she comes to Patty after she'd been there for a month. She says, Patty, she says, who lived in this house before? And Patty said, well, my grandmother and my grandfather. And she says, did your grandmother always have an apron on? And did your dad always walk around with a hat? And I said, yeah. She says, I see him all the time walking around the house. Now, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but that's what she said. But I got one other story. A couple of months ago, there's a policeman from Sacramento, and he has a big German short hair. And he comes in at nighttime around 10 o'clock or so, and he lives out here. And he brings the dog in, and the dog comes in and he gets underneath the stool. You don't know he's there. So one night he was here, and it was Pete, this fella, and the bartender, and somebody else. And they're talking, and pretty soon the dog starts to growl. So the cop says, Pete, is there anybody else in here? Pete said, no, just the 4 of us. He says, this dog never barks. He says, listen, can I take a walk around? So he said, sure. So they go out, and they go through the kitchen, and they go out through the kitchen, and through that back dining room, and then they get into here, and he starts to growl. And he barks. And he told Pete that there's somebody in here. And he said, I don't know. So they go back, and they go in the bathrooms and everything. And as the dog's walking out, he's growling. And he says, I don't know what's going on. He says, but there's something in here. And there's been rumors that my mom, that's her picture on the wall, they say that she's still walking the neighborhood in here, watching over things. I don't know. But that's been quite a while.
I'm going to tell the story. One day I was leaving. Okay. One day it was a Monday, on a Monday one day I was in the back bar running reports, and the cleaning people came up and they said, can we talk to you? And I said, what's going on? And they said, well, we see something happening back there. He says, when we sit down and we're talking, and when we get up, we put the chairs back in place, and I shut the lights off, and he says, then I leave, and he says, I always turn around and make sure that everything is neat. He says, when we leave, the chairs are always back. And he says, oh, we don't get it. Do they come back? Do they come back as ghosts or what? And I don't know, but that happens all the time to them. So they put the chairs back. When they leave, the chairs are back out to where they were beforehand. So that's the story that I know of.
So Tom, in your house that you live, did you live down on Jefferson, or your son?
No, we live on Jefferson.
You live in Jefferson. That's an old house.
Yes, it is.
Do you have a little, once in a while, somebody will wandering around and say, good morning, Tom?
Not that I know of, no.
No, not together, huh?
No.
That's just Andy.
I thought it was Steve.
So I don't have any, oh,
Peter, you told me the story before about your mom sending you out to Jefferson Boulevard. Would you tell that story?
you do what now?
That your mom would send you out to Jefferson Boulevard?
Take me out to Jefferson Boulevard?
Look for cars.
She would send you out to Jefferson Boulevard. You,
I'm not following you.
a little more detail there. Tell the story. Any more detail and I'll tell the story. Your mom used to send you out to see if any cars were coming.
Oh, well, no, that was my sisters and when they first opened. And there was, the front door was facing Jefferson Boulevard. And nobody would be coming in, so they'd all be looking out the window when a car was coming. They'd say, oh, here comes a car, I hope it stops. But then it would go by and then they missed that.
That was Anna used to tell that story.
Yeah.
Anna used to tell that story.
Yeah, yeah.
I just have one quick question. What's the secret room used for now?
It's just empty.
Oh,
I'll tell you what, in
Talk in the microphone.
1942 or 43, somewhere in there was a fella in Sacramento that came out and he put in 3 slot machines, a quarter, a dime, and a nickel in the bar. And twice a week he would come out and he'd open them up and we'd count the money, and he kept 2/3 and he'd give my father 1/3. And then, after 2 or 3 years, one day he called up and he says, George, get rid of those things because the feds is after me and they're closing me down. So my father grabbed those 3 slot machines and he took them up to that little secret room and he put them in there. And they were in there, 10 years. We forgot about them. And one day Perry and my youngest son, Danny, I told them about the room. So they go up and they open the door up and there's the 3 slot machines. And I still have, the quarter machine is still out in the warehouse. I have it here. But I took that. But they counted, we would count the money, and then all the loose stuff that was left that wasn't in wrappers, he'd put them all in a little pile, because I would help him count, and he'd give them to me as change. But they made quite a bit of money out of them, I guess. But they confiscated everything he had, but we were lucky to get out and save them, so they're still here.
Yeah, how about the story of them up on the palm trees and they would send a man?
When there was a speakeasy, there was a great big cottonwood tree out in front. And I've noticed it when we moved in, I was a young kid. They had a perch up there. So one day the Bill Desby comes in and he says, my dad asked him, he says, what's that perch up there for? He says, whenever that door opened, there was a man on that perch sitting up there. And he had a buzzer. And when somebody drove in that he didn't know just exactly who they were, hesitated with it, he'd push the buzzer and they'd close the doors. And the doors were solid steel with wood veneer on the outside. And the feds knew that what was going on, but they'd come and they'd hit that door with a sledgehammer. They'd break the veneer, but the walls were 18 inches thick and the steel, they could never get in, so they were always safe.
I love that story.
But we always had people like that come in. The fellow that my dad bought it from, that owned it, the Bill Densby, my dad asked him one day, he says, where are you at now? Where'd you move to? He says, I'm over on 4th and T. He says, I have a 3-story building. He says, my wife and I live on the 3rd floor. He says, the girls live on the 2nd floor, and they do all their work on the 1st floor. But this was in about 1974, 75. I was tending bar, and this guy comes up and he orders a sandwich, and I give him this sandwich. He says, do you know Bill Densby? I said, no, I don't. I knew him, I said, but I was just a little boy. He says, I'm remodeling his wife's house. I said, she still has a house of ill repute? He says, she still has 5 women working and she's 90 years old. She was still working. Anything else?
I got a question.
Yes.
On your menu, what are some of your original items that are on your menu and that have been there forever and a day?
Well, everything that we have here is my mother's recipe. It's never changed. We've never tried to deviate from anything. The steak sandwich was my brother-in-law, John Rivera. He was the one that started the steak sandwich. The first steak sandwich that we sold was 75 cents. And now it's $16. And when minimum wage goes up, it's going to be 20. But all the recipes have never varied. It's just something that we just stayed with. It was a winner, so why change it?
That's right.
Okay. Oh.
Just the last question. I'm a guest of Mike Campbell's today, but I really enjoyed your story about the Club Pheasant. I know it's not been that long that this was kind of a rural area out here. I mean, this Southport's a relatively recent addition. So I'm just curious, what was the original clientele? Was it just people driving out the country and they realized there's a restaurant and then it just kind of gained momentum?
My brother-in-law, John, he loved to play golf. So every Monday morning or during the week, 7 o'clock, he'd be out at William Land Park playing golf. And good question. So one morning he's out there and these 3 guys are getting ready to tee off and they said, why don't you join us? My brother-in-law says, oh, great. So they get to starting to play and my brother-in-law looking at these guys and he says, these guys are familiar, but where have I seen them? So as they're going along, he starts to talk to them. Well, come to find out, one was Max Bear.
Oh, wow.
And you've heard of Lou Costello and Bud Abbott?
Yeah.
That was the other 2 fellas. So they got to know each other and playing golf. So at the end, when they got all through, they all shook hands and my brother-in-law says, hey, come out to my place for dinner tonight. So that night, here comes Buddy Bear, Max Bear, Bud Abbott, and Lou Costello. And so that's how he got started. He played golf one day and Wing Fat from Frank Fats. He was playing. He played with him. We'd become acquainted with the Fat family and Wing and Fat, Frank, his father, and the family all came out. And it's just, if you give good service and you give food, I don't care what business you're in, if you give good service and you give a good quality product, people are going to come back. Word of mouth is more successful than advertising. Because all the advertising in the world, if you serve a lousy product, they're not going to come back. They're just going to go someplace else. And that's why we've had the success that we've had, was that we tried to be consistent. And that's with any business or whatever you do in life, whatever it is, it's got to be consistent and you'll be successful. But you got to work at it. It's not working from 8 to 4, 8 to 5. It's working from 8 to 8, 8 to midnight every day. It's a 6-day-a-week job. The restaurant business is like a dairy. Every morning you got to milk that cow in the morning and you got to milk that cow at night. The restaurant business is the same way. Your business is the same way. If you don't give the service, if you don't deliver a load of gas at a guy at 8 o'clock before he runs out, you're going to get your tail whistled at. And this is the same way. I don't care what it is. It's always the same. I mean, business is a business.
Thank you very much.
Okay.